this panel, I'm going to be talking about sexual assault and just the ways in which it affects us as women, and then as well as ways in which that we can support one another. Okay. So I want to start off by just saying God promises to administer justice to all who have been mistreated or abused. And this comes from Exodus 22, verse 22 to 24, and ultimately offers them everlasting comfort and complete emotional healing that no human court can provide. And that's Revelations 21:4. So I'm first going to give some statistics that I found about actually quite recently online about Zimbabwe and just sexual assault in that case. And I'm going to go ahead and read them off. 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence between the ages of 15 and 49. 1 in 4 women have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. 1 in 2 women without an education has experienced spousal violence, child marriage before completion of school. Between March 30th, 2020, when the lockdown began, and April 9th, 2020, the Musasa Project received over 764 GBV cases across all of its platforms. So this is less than a month of time that we're talking about in Zimbabwe, and 764 people reported incidences of sexual assault within the country. And one thing that I know a lot of people who have either suffered from sexual assault or either heard of is just this stigma that surrounds it and everything that it carries with it, the idea of being sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. And for 764 people to come forward and talk about these incidences that they've faced in their life where they were mistreated, it says a lot. And it makes you think about how many of these people have not come forward and how many of these people have not, talked about the issues that they have faced. Especially in the African community, one thing that I have noticed is just simply the conversation about the possibility of ever accidentally ending up in a situation where you might be abused or you might be harassed is not talked about enough. And it's not discussed enough, especially at the rate which it's occurring and the rate which it's happening. So I want to start off by just simply addressing it. That's the reason I chose to speak on this topic, is just addressing sexual assault as an issue, and not necessarily just as an issue, but as something with such a stigma. The stigma that it carries around, that it's ever the woman's fault or that it's ever the responsibility of the abused, is something that as women, we need to make sure that we are adamant about removing, and that we are adamant about, separating from this topic. Because one thing that is always 100% all the time, it's never your fault. Things like this don't happen to people because of, something that they did or in any way, shape, or form, like karma. So one thing that I will say is that, when it comes time to have to come forward in an incident like this, don't ever feel ashamed. Understand that you have this group of women right here. Understand that you have your parents. Understand that you have just women of Dominion in general as a resource, a place that you can go to, a sanctuary to discuss these things, that if it ever were to occur to you as a student, if it were ever to occur to you at work or in your community, just know that this is a place where you can come, no judgment, and you can reach out for that support and that help, and if ever a situation like this were to come across. Secondly, the other thing I want to emphasize is taking care of yourself and putting yourself to minimize the possibility of ending up in these situations. So first of all, one of the hot topics, especially on the topic of purity and modesty and self-respect, is dressing in a way that does not draw attention to your body. And as women, one thing that we have faced and one thing that we have really struggled with is the idea that it's our responsibility to dress ourselves a certain way in order to accommodate for the looks and the stares from men. And I just want to emphasize that it's never your fault. It's never your responsibility if you were ever to be attacked. You hear of stories of women, even in countries where only your eyes are allowed to be visible to the general public. If it's not in your own home, only your face or, your wrists to ankles are covered. And there's still just as many cases, the topic of sexual assault, even if it's not discussed, is still just as prevalent. So one thing that you have to understand about these cases and these situations, it's not about how you dress and what you're wearing, but it is important to make sure that you keep yourself safe and that you keep yourself protected. So if you ever do go out, if you're ever going out into the community, if you're going out with friends in a place and you decide to dress a certain way, make sure that you're protected. Make sure that you travel with people who you trust. Make sure that you are moving around with people who if ever a situation like that were to come up, they wouldn't leave you hanging out. They wouldn't leave you alone. They wouldn't leave you in an uncomfortable and unsafe situation. It's important to make sure that even if you do decide to wear clothing that some people might not consider modest, some people might not consider necessarily appropriate, what kind of message that you're going to send out to the public. It's never ever going to be an issue if you're putting yourself in a situation where, you know, no one will ever have the opportunity to pull you off alone. But things happen. People end up in situations that they don't intend. And so just making sure that you're prepared for those situations. If it means carrying around a pepper spray, if it means carrying around a concealed weapon. Now, I do not recommend carrying around weapons, especially, you know, in today's society, especially as Black people. That can be something that can draw a negative attention towards you, that could even make the situation worse. But making sure that you're protected in a way that, you know, on a train or a bus, if you're coming from class, from school, that you're protected enough that you're not going to end up in a situation where you have nothing to fight back, or you have nothing to use in defense if something like that were to ever to happen. So that's just about the protection of it. I talked about how, you know, reaching out to Women of Dominion as a resource, or even just, you know, your community, making sure that you have those people that you can go to. And, you know, the stigma that is surrounding sexual assault is something that I hope, you know, you really take to heart, because it's never ever going to be something that we can really get down to the bottom of, something that we can really, you know, address and find out what exactly it is that we need to do as a community that isn't telling women, you know, to dress a certain way so that they can avoid being attacked, because that's not the case. But to find ways of, as a community, really protecting each other and not protecting people who have been perpetrators of sexual abuse. You know, a lot of family members, you know, like young kids, especially whenever, you know, young kids, you know, express to you as a parent, express to you as an aunt, or just an elder, that, you know, they're concerned about being around somebody, that they're concerned about, you know, being around a relative or just a family friend. Pay attention, because young children don't really understand sexual assault and like the negative energy around it and everything that's going on. So for them to express concern, and for them to really, you know, make it to come to you uncomfortable and concerned about somebody, really take that to heart, really take that to consideration. Don't be a part of the problem and, you know, tell children to be quiet, or tell children to do certain things to accommodate for these people in our communities, to accommodate for these people that are, you know, perpetrating these but very disgusting, very violent crimes on women especially. And I will mention this briefly, the topic of sexual assault as far as women are concerned is a lot bigger. And when it comes to men, it happens just as much. And, you know, that stigma that it only happens to women is also part of the reason, and, you know, why that movement has not been able to really pick up that, you know, that momentum and that effort, because people have failed to address, you know, both sides of the situation. And finally, I want to talk simply just, you know, in your homes, like with your families, is that when people come forward about these incidences, the last thing that you want to do is to ask them what they did wrong in the situation. The last thing that you want to do as a person is to make them feel as though, you know, they were responsible in any way, shape, or form for what was committed, what kind of, you know, crime was committed against them. And as I mentioned previously about, you know, the verse from Revelations 21, about no human court can provide the emotional healing and, you know, just the justice that you deserve after a situation like that. So really, really finding God in these situations is important, simply because that's the only kind of healing that you will ever find that will put you back on the track that you were before anything ever happened. You really have to understand that, you know, your perpetrator, whether or not they walk free, whether or not they actually do get accused, whether or not they, you know, they go on to commit these crimes further, or, you know, they actually, you know, justice is served, is not something that should drive your healing process. It's not something that should, you know, motivate you to feel better about the situation, or motivate you to want to go on and live your life regularly. It's that relationship that you have with God and that trust that you have with him, that he values you as a person, and that nothing about your value is stripped away from that situation. Sexual assault is never something that, you know, should make you feel like less value. We save ourselves for marriage, you know, we protect our bodies, and we keep ourselves holy for a purpose. And that purpose is never disrupted, especially in a situation that you had no control over, or that you did not allow to happen to you. You know, so just making sure that you never feel like you're at fault, and making sure that whenever somebody comes to you, that these situations, you know, it's always an issue of like, who do you believe, you know, whether or not that none of that, I'm saying this to say that none of that matters. None of that matters. It's about your relationship with God, and that's the only kind of healing that you should be seeking after, even if you do decide to, you know, reach out and to seek legal justice in a situation like this. Just making sure that you don't look for your personal healing, your personal, you know, goals. And you know, sexual assault is a spectrum. There's a lot of different ways that it looks. A lot of people think that rape is the only version of sexual assault that, you know, takes place, but no, you know, being sexually harassed on the street by somebody who's walking by, or being touched inappropriately by somebody in a crowded place, or just simply being told things, messaged things, especially with social media platforms, being sent images, any kind of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, it all falls under the same category. It all deserves the same amount of justice, and it also deserves the same amount of respect. As women of Dominion, it is our responsibility to advocate for the community that we see struggling with these issues, and making sure that they feel, you know, respected whenever, you know, these things happen, to make sure that they don't feel like they've come to a place where their issue is less of a concern than something else. So I just, you know, I really wanted to take this opportunity to really just discuss it, and really just, you know, put it out there so that people can be talking about it, people can be thinking about it. There's a lot of work that could be done as far as sexual assault is concerned, but just making sure that, you know, in a relationship especially, you know, you want to make sure that that's something that you really got to grasp on, simply because you never want to feel like just because you're in a relationship with somebody, it's not sexual assault. I really want to make that very clear. Just because you're in a relationship with somebody does not mean that they're incapable of doing something to you that you don't approve of, or something that you didn't ask for. And it's important, especially when you're saving yourself for marriage, and, you know, you're making sure that that's something that your goals and your passion, you want to keep yourself pure. You have to make sure that even if you're with somebody that, you know, does not follow the same belief system that you do, that they don't take advantage of that, and because you've chosen the decisions that you've made with your body, that they don't take advantage of those decisions and put you in a worse off place than you would have been before. So when you're dealing with consent, when you're dealing with, you know, people, making sure that you're very clear about what you want and the way that you want to be treated, using your words. It's hard. It can be uncomfortable to, you know, to really, you know, spell it out. I'm not going to be doing this with you. I'm not going to be doing that with you. These are my boundaries. It can be uncomfortable, but understanding that in a relationship, these things are extremely important, because without them, you have no way of protecting yourself and your body. Your words, your mouth is your first level of defense. After that, you know, it's just simply putting yourself in situations where you're protected, relationship or not. And then finally, also, if need be, carrying around pepper spray, some kind of weapon that just keeps you feeling comfortable and safe. So that's all that I have to say as far as the topic of sexual assault is concerned. I hope that, you know, I either gave you new information, or that you will, you know, be thinking about it just a little more clearly in terms of just where, you know, where you can be, you know, a positive light on a situation like this. So I'm going to pass this over to Yevizo.